Hello, Love Wrestling. Welcome back to another Love Wrestling interview. I am JPJ, and I am your host for this go-round, and I am super duper excited to be talking to the gentleman you see joining me on my screen, one Amir Jordan. This is really, I'm going to be honest with you, Amir, this is my first long-form professional wrestling interview. So
it's me.
It's you. I'm excited. It's you. I'm excited. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to have a good chat with you. But first and foremost, as usual, like I normally do, just how you doing today? How's life been treating you lately?
I'm great. You know, I'm 2 weeks. I'm 2 weeks away from coming over to Canada. So I'm all signs are pointing towards that. I've got one more show this Saturday, so I'm preparing for that. I'm wrestling Rampage Brown for Northwest biggest ever show. So very excited for that. But once I'm through with that, the rest of it's just, spending all that time preparing myself to make sure I come out to Canada and I put my best foot forward. I've got a one-way flight booked, so
I like it.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. And we are going to dive into Canada in a little bit, but I like to, at the beginning of the day, right? Most of us, I would think, are wrestling fans at heart. We got into this, whether it's on the content side, the performing wrestling side. Either way, most of us, if not all of us, are wrestling fans at heart. So I like to dive into when did you first fall in love with wrestling? When's the first memory you have seeing it, loving it? Like when did wrestling really connect with you for the first time?
I love this one. I love this story. So basically, so I was born in Pakistan. So I'm originally Pakistani, so I'm dual national. I've got a British passport and I'm half Pakistani. I'm a bit of a half and half. So basically, my granddad, it was just my immediate family that immigrated from Pakistan to the UK. But this one summer, my grandfather came and stayed with us, and he asked for SummerSlam 1997 or Survivor Series 97. I think it might have been SummerSlam or Survivor Series 97. It was the one where it was Shawn Michaels as a special guest referee, and it was Bret Hart versus Undertaker.
Oh, The Undertaker. Was that it?
Yeah.
When he hit him with the chair by accident?
Yeah, and he spat at him and stuff.
Pretty sure, I think that was SummerSlam 97. I think that was SummerSlam.
SummerSlam 97. Was British Bulldog on it?
Yeah. Yes.
I could probably Google it, but so that was the first time I ever laid eyes. Oh, excuse me, ring doorbell. That was the first ever time I laid eyes on the sport of professional wrestling was with my granddad. So both my grandparents were massive wrestling fans, and my grandma, she didn't speak a word of English, but she understood the art of professional wrestling. She knew that Vince McMahon was the bad guy, and the corporation were the bad guys, and The Rock was the good guy, and Austin was coming up against Vince McMahon and all this stuff. She knows all the stories. So that's where I came up with it, was actually watching wrestling initially with my grandparents. And then after that, it was literally just a case of trying to get hold of any sort of wrestling. It wasn't as easily accessible back then.
Yes.
That it is right now, right? There wasn't a YouTube and you could go watch Elimination Chamber from 2 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's crazy when you think about just how easy it is to access things now. Like I'm in my late 30s. We were talking about it a little bit before we started recording here, but I'm in my late 30s. And when I wanted to get wrestling, when I was a kid and first falling in love with wrestling, like I had to go to the video store and rent old wrestling tapes. You know what I mean? So now, like you said, you can flip on a computer, you can go on your phone, the thing you have in your hand all day, and just type in any wrestler, anything you want, and you can find almost anything, It's crazy.
So easy. It's so easy back then. Like, I don't know how it was like in Canada, but in the UK, if you didn't have Sky Sports, so we didn't used to pay, right? We didn't used to pay for the channels. So that limits where you can find it. And so I only grew up watching SmackDown because you needed to have Sky Sports for Raw. So
really?
you'd only watch. I'd watch Sunday Night Heat, where you'd get a few Raw highlights, and then you'd get a Stevie Richards match, right? But other than that, we'd get SmackDown on Saturday on Sky 1 at 11 a.m. So it would run from 1 p.m. through the afternoon. And yeah, that's when I finally got some sort of like consistent weekly access to that. around about the like invasion storyline time is when. Before that, I'd watch it in bits. In between, we ended up moving to Pakistan as well.
Okay.
So I spent years between 99 and 01 is when I spent in Pakistan. So that was again with my grandparents. Whenever they were watching it or wherever I could get my eyes on it, I'd always try and catch it. And I had a lot of interest. I knew who X-Pac was, and I knew who all the wrestlers were. But when it comes to consistently watching, it was probably like 01, 02, 03 when we moved back to the UK.
Okay.
And, like I was watching everything, week by week.
Yeah.
And then the internet started, YouTube started, Daily Motion and all that stuff. And then had that's in the world. Then
exactly.
Then we had BitTorrent.
Yeah. Remember that BitTorrent? Oh my God.
Yeah.
So at what point does the being a wrestling fan turn into this is what I want to do?
Weird story. So I always wanted to. So I probably the height of my independent wrestling, like internet wrestling fan, I guess, was when I was like 18, 19, as it would be, right?
Yes.
I'm talking 08, 09, when like Dirt Sheets, WrestleZone, 411 Mania.
Oh yeah.
Dave Meltzer, all that stuff, and I was like fully embroiled into it. Do you know what I mean? Like I was looking up spoilers for Royal Rumble to see who was spotted. Like it was so exciting back then for me to be that type of a wrestling fan, because all of a sudden I got all of this access of like behind the scenes, right? And as a kid, that's all I watched. The world wanted to know was like what happens behind the scenes.
Of course.
So when I got all the access and I started watching like, a lot of indie stuff, and I start seeing, there's an independent wrestling scene and there's schools and you can go and learn and stuff. That's when I developed an interest in being like, maybe I could go to a wrestling school. But at the time in the UK, wrestling wasn't really a massive thing. Okay. Wrestling, like in the UK, wrestling was on ITV in the old World of Sport days when it was on ITV, and it was the scene was, it had its few moments and stuff, but it was pretty much up and down during that time until it in like 2012, 13 is when it started like peaking to the peak that eventually led to NXT UK. So there wasn't that much access. But on top of all of that, I come from a very traditional Pakistani family, and I was brought up with being told that, you're going to get an education, and my dad wanted me to become a doctor, and like, the standard thing that an immigrant parent would want for their kids, right?
Of course, yeah.
Like in his mind, it's like, I didn't sacrifice everything coming from a small village in Pakistan to become a doctor in the UK for you to then go around prancing around in tights.
Yeah. Was that
right?
Yeah. Was that difficult having that conversation with them when you were like, hey, this is really what I want to do? Like, I'm very passionate about this. Like, I'm going to go do this. Was that a difficult experience for you with having those parents that wanted, you the best for you in their eyes?
So I didn't tell them for a while.
Oh, okay.
So I tried to hide it as much as I could. So like I started my training at the old Progress Wrestling School in mid-2015.
Okay.
Social media didn't know about my wrestling until like April 2016. So for nearly a year, I kept it very quiet because of that fact. And also because of the fact that I was like, let me actually try, and you don't want to be one of those guys who says, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and then you don't end up doing it, right?
Yeah.
So that was, I was working in investment banking in central London. I was making good money. And I had this little secret life that I had that I was even hiding from like my roommates and stuff, right?
Wow.
Not everybody knew about it, because I was like, let me just, on the sly, I'd have my training gear with me after work. So I'd be getting out of my suit, getting into my training gear, getting on the tube, going straight to training to go do beginner's class to learn how to do bumps, right?
Yeah.
Because that was my escape. So ultimately what ended up happening was I got discouraged when I was at that age. I went to university. I ended up, living out in New York. I ended up getting a good job and everything. And it was very exciting and it was awesome. I was working as a business analyst for one of the biggest investment banks in the world. And I got work in Manhattan, in Stanford, and in London. So I was doing all right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
I was on a pretty good path there, working in the right industry, and I had the right skills for it as well, right? So I was actually, and as there's parts of it I enjoyed as well, but it was one of those things where it wears out at you, like living that life, and there's a cost to it.
Yeah.
Cost to all of that money is kind of like your 20s, right?
Oh yeah.
And what you're paying, and you don't get your 20s every time. You don't get to chase your dreams every time, and it kind of, At a certain point, it got to a point where I was like, if this is the life that I have to make this money that I have to make, then I got to find a different way, because we do spend the majority of our lives at our jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I looked at it was, because maybe I'm weird, but I was just like, if I can make such a success out of something that I'm not passionate about, that I don't really care about, making a bunch of money for someone else and also making a lot of money for myself. If I put this same energy into something that I did care about, i.e. professional wrestling, maybe I could make something. So I took the plunge. Like, I wouldn't suggest anyone else do it, but like I took like months to save up. I messaged places, and my two choices was to either go to, because I had money, right? I had a bit of money saved.
Because you had been working and being successful,
And my two choices were to either go to the Dudley Boys, to the Team 3D Academy, or to Landstorm School. And ultimately, again, the thing that led me to Canada was the fact that I was able to get a work visa to work in Canada, because it's easier for a citizen. So ultimately, at that point, I actually came over on a 2-year work visa that I paid for myself. And that's what led me out to Calgary, to Canada, to train at Landstorms. And that's what led me to Canada.
Well, and I was going to dive into that. So, so you had your first professional match in England, though, for Progress in the fall of 2015, correct?
Yeah, so it was at one of their trainee schools. So back in the day, when Progress was kind of at its peak at that time, they used to run these shows called Potential. So they had a training school, and they were trainee shows. So it was at a show called, and again, remember, this was during my Batman days when I was like, no one knew that about my wrestling, right? Mm-hmm. My family didn't know that I had this match or anything, right? So it was at Nambuka nightclub. It was at like an old nightclub somewhere, and I went to work that day. I came, I got the tube onto the place, and like we ended up, I was tag teaming with this guy, and like we had like these golden trunks on that I've never worn. I've always worn long tights, but we didn't have gear, right? But it was cool. It was cool. We looked like a tag team, and we did a few cool bits that we learned in training. So yeah, that was my debut match. It was no one knew about it.
Yeah.
So, all that stuff. The coolest thing is the wrestling world is so far removed from the real world that those worlds would have never collided.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Right? I kind of got away with it and had my first match kind of just to myself. It was
cool. That's pretty cool. And then, like you said, you start training with Lance Storm. It leads you over to Calgary. But you actually started wrestling, or your first run was in Western Canada, correct?
Yeah. No, absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So basically what ended up happening was, like I said, I came over on a 2-year work visa, which I didn't end up utilizing in the end because British wrestling was booming at the time.
Yeah.
At the time I was just like, all right, I don't need to work out here. I'll go back home. But for the 6 months I was out there, for the first 3 months I was training at Lance's. I was staying at his, Lance owns a house in Calgary, and his students can rent it out. So I was staying at a house with 4 other students. It was really cool. There was 2 of us upstairs. It was downstairs. One of the guys he wrestles under the name of RC Dupree. He's based out of Pittsburgh. So he's on the independents. He's done a few bits for AEW Dark and stuff. Yeah. I became really good friends with them, and we were training every single day with Lance in the ring, Monday to Friday, learning for the first 3 months. And then for the 3 months after that, I was on... I ended up, during that time, whilst we were training, I was going out to help out at PWA and RCW. And
I was going to mention RCW, yeah.
Exactly, going to all the local shows. So that's who I ended up working for then. I wrestled for RCW, I wrestled for PWA. I went out to Kelowna for this company called Big West Wrestling. Kelowna, that was one of the nicest drives I've ever done, because you drive through like the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, beautiful scenic.
Amazing. Right. I loved it well. And then I wrestled for HIW out in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. I did the drive the other direction then. I did that myself. So I ended up working for a few little promotions there. And like, had I stayed, I would have ended up, probably trying to do more. I was wanting to do like one of the Tony Condello tours. And, at that point, I had 2 options where I was like, I'll move to Toronto and utilize this work visa and maybe go and try and wrestle over there, or I can move back home. At that time, it just made sense to move back to the UK, just because of the way British wrestling was going on. And then 2016, after that, I moved back to the UK, and I just joined right into that British wrestling peak. That just basically that 2 years led me all the way from being a nobody to being signed by the WWE as part of NXT UK within like a year and a half. So
Yeah.
I joined that boom right at the right time, and I had that work ethic, and I was going up and down the country. And in the UK, like when it's good, you can be working like 17 days out of 18 in the summertime. Sometimes it was pretty class.
Yeah,
everywhere, man.
Yeah. And I was going to lean into, obviously, so you move back home, you're wrestling your butt off. You're wrestling your butt off for all these different, Progress and a bunch of other companies in England. And then the NXT UK stuff happens, okay? And you're there. Okay, no, if there's stuff before, go ahead. You can stop me. Yeah, if you...
to be honest with you, that's the thing. So, like, I kind of turned up, and like, I was just like, I had a bit of business sense, and I'd learned a few lessons from, real life and whatever I'd learned from wrestling, and being at Lancers gave me such a good foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I got in my car, I got another job which I ended up quitting again. That was another good job, and I quit it, and I went home, and my mum was just like, "Should you need a slap or what? Get life away for this wrestling." Like, that was a job at KPMG. It was a job at another. So I was, because I had decent qualifications, so I was just like, oh, but I was just throwing these jobs away like nothing. So in the end, what ended up happening was, like, British wrestling was like, it was brought, I can't describe it. It seems ridiculous now, but like, we were having shows on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, like up and down the country during that time. There was like hot shows with great talent that are now most of them now are either NXT or on WrestleMania, or like, like guys like Pete Dunne and Ridge Holland and Gibson and James Drake and JD McDonough and all these guys, like,
that scene must have been just wild at that time. Just wild. The crop of talent is just insane.
Like 3 shows every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Yeah.
Country, like, there was like fans that had spreadsheets of like how many shows there were, and it was crazy. So as an up and coming wrestler, I was just like, I've got this moment right now. If I can work my ass off, I can get on as many shows. And like, it got to that point. And then you mix in with the UK. Back then, I mean, it's quieting down a lot now, but back then we had camp shows as well, right? Okay. So you'll have heard like Daniel Bryan or Dax Harwood, one of the DIY guys. Yeah. Incorrect, not DIY guys.
FTR.
One of the FTR guys.
Yeah.
A lot of those guys, a lot of the American guys have done shows working on the camps and stuff in Butlins and all that stuff. So I was getting experience. So I was getting fast-tracked like non-stop, and I was loving it, because at that time we were getting paid nothing. But I was coming up with a crop of talent now, who some of them are like, Kip Sabian's at AEW, and like kids doing stuff at New Japan, and like myself, Joe Connors, a bunch of guys got signed by NXT UK. Like, we all ended up taking advantage of, utilizing our talents and going up and down the country during the boom of British wrestling. Do you know what I mean?
For sure.
Yeah, in the end, what ended up happening was, like, not that many people knew that I would be one of the guys getting signed, because I ended up getting signed with guys like, Flash Morgan Webster and Mark Andrews and all, Wild Boar Mike Hitchman, Eddie Dennis, all these guys that had been part of the scene for so long. And it was like a trial by fire for me, because I was just like, when we ended up going down to the O2 Arena to get sign our contracts, I was sat in the dressing room with a lot of the UK guys, and I was kind of like starstruck a little bit.
Oh, for sure.
Like, whoa, this is cool for me to be in the dressing room with someone, some of these guys, let alone, being in the WWE and like Baron Corbin's walking past you and like, you know what I'm going to catering and stuff like that. So, to have that exposure early on in my career, I look back at it now and I was like, that was so good, because it was just shocks you into it. And that's what I need. I'm a bit of an, and I was just like, I got that so quick. And those 4 years I ended up spending, as part of NXT UK and training at the Performance Center, being a part of a weekly show and being a part of a tag team. And we ended up going out to WrestleMania, wrestle the Axxess and everything for the WWE.
Like, oh my God, I did not know that. That must have been an experience and a half. It sounds like you grew up like mainly a WWE kid too, right? Like, was WWE the main one?
100% growing up.
Yeah.
I had it was all WWE. It then turned into TNA in like 2005 and 6. And then when I discovered the internet and I got the downloads and stuff, it turned into ROH and bits of British wrestling. And then, but I was always, obviously always WWE. Like, always, obviously, I ended up having an amazing fascination for ECW just because of how cool.
I loved ECW.
But it was, I'd be lying if I said that in 1999 I was tape trading ECW. That I wasn't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like I remember I watched WCW on Channel 5 over here, which is one of like the smaller channels in like 2001, and I'm pretty sure I remember seeing Bam Bam Bigelow. Like that was my only exposure. Apart from that, it was all WWE. So to be there and like
I was gonna say to be at WrestleMania, even wrestling on Axxess is I've seen one of my favorite live matches ever at an Axxess. It was with the great Brody Lee and Dijak at a banger one year that I went. But to grow up a wrestling fan, to grow up a WWE kid.
What year was that you were?
Oh, it was 35 in New York. It was 35 in New York.
Brother, that was the Axxess I was at.
Well, there you go. There you go.
2019, yeah, WrestleMania.
Yeah, that was it.
At the pier.
Yes. Yeah, that was a great venue for Axxess too. It was right on the water. It was amazing.
And it was awesome. We got taken in the bus. We got to stay at the hotel at the Marriott. It was like
that must have been so surreal.
When you are on the road with the WWE as part of NXT UK, or when we got out to do Axxess, like you get looked after, like they properly. You get treated like a star. You get, we get to stay at like the nicest hotels, the catering, and like you do get an environment there, and like obviously like you get looked after for injuries too and all that stuff. Like I had shoulder surgery. I had 2 instances in whilst I was whilst I was part of NXT UK, where I had to take time off for my shoulder, and I got paid. I got paid my way throughout COVID, all of that stuff. We got paid, so it was. They even looked after me as well. Do you know what I mean? So it was, it was such a beneficial experience for me to come out of such an early part of my career, where now I can be 33 years old, as long as I've been in the business, and say that I've actually. It was crazy the way I look at it. I never thought I'd get signed by WWE, let alone be a guy that's been signed, that had a run, that got released, and that still has a career, and that's about to go out and do a run in Canada. And I'm just like, well, wrestling's pretty cool. It works.
It is. It's the best. And I was an UK viewer, so I watched UK. I would usually, I would catch up on it, but I would watch it. And you teamed a lot with Kenny Williams, which led to a kind of a cool story between you guys that ended with a loser leaves town, kind of loser leaves NXT UK no DQ match that it was a very, very good match. You obviously, that was kind of in your departure there. But in general, it sounds like your experiences with WWE and NXT UK were positive ones. You had a great time there. You learned a lot. Dealing with COVID and everything kind of in the middle of it. Like, do you think, and again, we could say this about a ton of things when it comes to like COVID. I don't want to stick on COVID too long, but like, do you think things might have been differently for you at NXT UK as a whole, you personally? Obviously, if kind of right in the middle of the run at the beginning, you get there in 2019 and then boom, right at the beginning of 2020, there's a big chunk where nothing's happening now. Everyone needs to stop. Everything needs to stop.
Well, here's the thing, like, obviously to say one point before everything, there was some very frustrating times at the UK as well. And, that this is part, and it's what I've learned and, if we were having this interview a year ago, I might have had a less calmer answer to this. And it's a process, right? It's a process.
We keep growing.
There was some really frustrating times. Like, there was times where, there'd be times where we'd be sat home for 5 weeks in between tapings during COVID. It was a real tough time. Like we were probably the show that ended up doing the empty arena show longest. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Again, ultimately that was difficult because you work for a crowd, but ultimately it made me a better worker because now you've got to get yourself over as a character in front of no one. Like, it was crazy. Like your music would play and you could hear the camera guys making their little clunky sounds moving around and stuff because the second the bell rung, there's no crowd there, right?
No noise,
And there was time where we spent at the performance center and like the reps that we put in at the performance center. And again, for someone in the position that I was in, I was only ever going to benefit from that experience, the good and the bad. During COVID, it was difficult. But ultimately, like during my injuries, it was difficult as well, going down to the PC and like, you'd always have like there was this thing called PC anxiety, where you're going down to the performance center, but you don't know what you how you're going to be used on TV that week, and stuff like this. And like these are things. But again, you come out of it and you know that this is just part of the journey. And you get signed for another contract somewhere else, you're going to be thinking about the same things. You just you just have to learn to get better at dealing with it. So like, to get an experience like that for 4 years as part of my development as a wrestler, because it is developmental, right? We were part of developmental, and we got really good deals. It's a shame that it all came to an end, but to be honest with you, at that point, I was kind of ready to move on to my next step personally anyway.
Yeah.
At that time, with the way that things were going, I was actually personally and professionally not in the place that I wanted to be mentally, and I had a lot of confidence issues as well. And a big part of this past year, post-release on the British independent scene, I've been working on building that confidence back and getting those reps back in, just to instill that self-belief in myself. Because again, we all do it. We go through the mental ups and downs, because also we got to remember life is also happening. Real life is also happening alongside all this madness, right?
Oh yeah.
Paid and cost of living crises and all sorts, gas prices and all this shit.
Oh my God, yeah.
So like, it's just one of those things where you got to keep it all going. But I always look at it like this: I'm coming out of a difficult time in my career, and I'm coming out better for it as a worker, as a human being, as a person. And that's part of why I'm super stoked to get to come out to Canada and wrestle.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, it starts with us. It starts with us at the end of the month on July 28th. You are wrestling for Love Pro Wrestling at our event, LPW 17, Violence, Violence, Violence. But in general, you had your first run of matches in Canada, which we've already discussed. So personally for you, and I know, how cool is it to come back to kind of where it all started for you? Like, how excited are you? What are you looking forward to? What are some of the things you remember and miss from that first run you had a little while ago? It's what, 7-8 years, 2016. So you're talking 7 years now, but like, what's some of the stuff besides the wrestling? What's some of the stuff you're super excited about to like just come back to kind of where it all started? Like you said, your rebirth in Canada.
You know what? Honestly, I never thought that a time like this would ever actually come, because again, like, I ended up getting released. I ended up coming back to British wrestling. A few months ago, like 6 months ago, is when I was starting to think about what is my next step, right? Where do I want to go next? And like I think I was telling you before as well, like back in the old territory days, when you'd spent a lot of time in one place, you'd move on to another, right? But we don't have those territory dreads anymore. But what we do have is, cheap international flights and a smaller world and a global network, right? That we can all utilize. So utilizing that, this is a new territory for me, and it's a new old territory, but it's a territory. And like, I spent 6 months out in Canada. I've always loved coming out to Canada. Some of the things that I'm looking forward to, like, I'm looking forward to driving through the Rocky Mountains again.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm looking forward to going to Toronto. I've never been to Vancouver. I spent a lot of time. I'm looking forward to hanging out with all the boys in Calgary and in Edmonton. I've got some really good friends from back in the day who I've not seen in years. I've stayed in touch with. Guys that wrestle for Love Wrestling, like Mo Jabari and Chucky Blaze, and a bunch of these guys are all like super cool guys. When I was in Canada, I used to tag with Sheik. I was his manager.
Oh, very good.
As well, so
yeah,
I'm looking forward to reuniting with the Sheik again as well.
I was gonna say, yeah, Sheik Shabbat. He's one half of our current tag team champions right now.
There you go. So I'm coming back to tag with him again as well.
All right, I love that. So yeah, you said you'll be in a little bit of a run. You're going to be in Western Canada from July to almost somewhere in mid or end of August, and then you're going to be going to Toronto, more of the East Coast, for a little bit at the end.
Yeah, so I mean, look, I've booked a one-way flight, so
which I like. And you did
in the UK. They say I'm on a bit of a mad one, because because I've always. I mean, this is what's always betting on myself and like putting myself into these positions is always what's worked for me in my real life and in my wrestling career. And whenever I've been at a crossroads, I've always been like, if I'm not getting something from somewhere, and if I'm not getting what it is I want, I need to go to that place. So yeah, like through August, I'll be based between Edmonton and Calgary, and then from August to TBA, I'll be based out in Toronto. I've got some family out in Toronto and stuff.
Very cool.
And I know that there's a lot of cool wrestling out in Toronto that I want to explore.
Yeah.
Like Destiny Wrestling and Smash Wrestling. And there's a bunch of promotions out there that I would love to get my hands on. And I really want to go train at Battle Arts as well. I really want to go to Battle Arts Academy out in Mississauga out there as well. So, you know, for me, this is, as much as it's a wrestling trip to do wrestling shows, I want to go to all the training sessions as well. I want to go train with people. Like, for me, I've got this time to fully like invest in professional wrestling. And it seems like I'm coming to a scene that seems to be on the up. Like ever since COVID, like I'm wrestling for love wrestling. I'm wrestling for WrestleCore in like my first few days. I'm doing 6 shows in my first 10 days. I can't remember. The last time I did that was probably in like 2018 when British wrestling was at its, at its biggest. But I get to do that out in Western Canada, and I love to travel as well. I love AMW. I'll go for AMW. I'm trying to think of all the Canadian things.
Yeah, all the things you're gonna try to hit.
The standard one's Tim Hortons.
Oh yeah.
I'm watching Trailer Park Boys to.
Okay. All right, that's pretty good.
So there's a start.
Yeah. Right. Well, you kind of answered.
Like Our Lady Peace and Nickelback.
Okay. Hey, Our Lady Peace, great band, one of my fans. You kind of talk. Obviously, you going back to Canada for the next few months is kind of the immediate future for you. But as you said, you've kind of like regained your confidence, kind of reset yourself, coming out of like a time that wasn't so great. What are the future aspirations for Amir Jordan now? Like, obviously, you're going to hit Canada these next couple months. You're going to kill it. But are you just thinking about that right now, or do you have some short-term, long-term future goals that are kind of on your plate that you're trying to accomplish here as you move forward?
I want to sign a contract. I want to sign my next contract.
Okay.
And I know WWE is always going to be there.
Yeah.
And WWE will all obviously WWE to WWE, but I think it's really cool that I've got an opportunity right now, having been to the WWE, to explore other options. Mm-hmm. And I always found it, even just as a wrestling fan, I always found like Eddie Guerrero's career cool, or like a Chris Jericho career.
Yeah, Chris Jericho, I was going to mention.
When he went to TNA and like had a run there. Like, I've always wanted to be one of those wrestlers where, even on the indies in the UK as well, I've always wanted to make sure I wrestled at every place. It's like a weird OCD thing, maybe it is with me, but I've always felt like those wrestlers are the coolest. Like the guys that, he did a little bit in Japan. Or like, Bryan Danielson's a really good example. Like, he wrestled everywhere. Then he went to WWE, and like, so like, I'm looking for my next professional contract. And there's noise that needs to be made in order to do that. And me betting on myself with this trip is the noise that is hopefully going to be made. So I'm quite forward and quite strong on the belief that this is going to be a career-changing trip for me. So I plan on making it that.
I love it. I think there is no better way than to end this chat with that. I want to thank you again for joining me. Let the people know. I know you said you got one big match before you start your way. So let the people know where you're going to be wrestling, your first couple dates in Canada, so they can, try to check you out if you're going to where they're going to be.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm wrestling a bloody man mountain by the name of Rampage Brown on Saturday. That's the biggest wrestling show, that North Wrestling, that's run out of Newcastle. I mean, it's probably a little bit too far from Edmonton for anyone.
Yeah.
I'll say this, I am taking, God help, on the 27th of July, I'm leaving Manchester Airport, and I have 3 separate flights that I need to take.
Oh my
God.
God.
Really hope that there's no delays. I'm due to land in Edmonton on the morning of the 28th, and the show's on. So, wish me luck. I don't have any issues with luggage or anything like that.
Yeah.
But granting all of that stuff going smoothly, I will be at Love Wrestling on the 28th of July. On the 29th of July, I will be at WrestleCore in Vancouver, and that's actually a rock music festival.
Really?
Yeah. So that's the Russell and Roots Music Festival.
Very good.
Awesome. That like I literally get there on the day. I've got a show. Then we got to find a way of getting to Vancouver. I think I'm going to be in a car with someone. That's going to be awesome. And then I'm back for a few days, and then I'm back again. I'll be wrestling for All Star Wrestling in Abbotsford in Vancouver. That's a double show on August 4th, and then I'm back in Vancouver again for WrestleCall. They've got the Lucha Libre Spectacular.
Yes, I saw that. I did see that graphic.
And they just keep releasing like new graphics of new talent where I'm just like, that's going to be the best 2 days ever, because there seems to be talent coming from all over the world. And like, I can't wait to mingle and meet them all and learn, you know, from different styles, and, you know, maybe show them a few things that I know and all that stuff. And I think that's going to be super cool, because like, this is what I'm saying, man, like, the Canadian scene seems like it's kicking off. I've not even, you know, this is my first 10 days and you guys are keeping me busy. Like, I'm coming to work. I'm coming to leave an impression. And like I said, like, I'm coming to make some, I don't even know if I'm allowed to swear, but like, I'm coming to make some effing noise.
Yeah. And I think, and I think you'll make plenty of, I think you'll make plenty of noise up here. I think all of us, all of Love Pro Wrestling, and I can probably speak for all of Canada, are very excited that you're going to be here for a while, doing what you do best. And it all starts on July 28th for LPW 17, Violence, Violence, Violence. You will be challenging Son of Irish for the LPW Challenge Championship. Best of luck to you that night, my friend, and thank you for the time. I really appreciate it. This was a great chat, and I hope that we get to do it again.
Awesome. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you.
Cheers.